Hello.
Hi, I'm Chris.
I'm Jordan.
And welcome to the show. Gosh, I can't stop laughing at that every time I see that.
I did better this time.
Yeah?
I think it's because I watched it all week.
It's been on a loop on all of our computers just watching. Wow, Chris, what a silly guy. Also, fact, that's accurate. So, Anyway, today we kind of want to jump a follow-up to last week's, or last times, not weeks. I'm used to saying week with the other webcasts. Last attempt.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah. At PowerShell.
We kind of briefly touched on pipelining, but there's a lot to that we could really jump into.
Absolutely. And so this kind of goes hand in hand with our beginner level PowerShell, because a lot of you watching probably are familiar with the pipeline and how to use the pipeline, either from PowerShell experience directly or from other languages. You know, you might be familiar with command line, or Lex over here is probably familiar with, different like Bash and different other shells from Linux. I know, right?
Of course, and I'm just glad you both will be hitting the pipe today.
That's right. We'll be hitting the pipe hard today, because that's what we do here at PowerShell Webcasts Day. So, with that being said, we just kind of want to touch a little bit on objects. So, the whole point of PowerShell is objects, right?
Yep. The main value is you're not returning back just a string of text, but actual data that you can interact with.
Yeah. You might kind of remember this from other things like command line. So let's pull up command line here. I'm going to kind of show you here. You might be familiar with commands like ipconfig to find your IP configuration, right? If I wanted to get the IP address, you can do things like find string, go IPv4, and find just that line. Then you're going to have to do some manipulation to get just the IP address. You might do a for loop, select the individual token, blah, blah, blah. Boring. So don't want to do that. We want to do PowerShell. PowerShell returns objects, which are related bundles of data that have properties or attributes that are related for that data, as well as, you put it really well like this, methods, which are...
it's an action against the object.
Yeah, an action on the object. That's a good way to think of it. Think of it like a car. I have a Hyundai, you have a Ford, I think. What do you have?
Yeah, Ford.
Ford. They're both cars. They have different properties. One has a different model, one has a different engine size, one has different stuff, but they both have a gas and a brake pedal, right? So you can think of them that way. They're bundled together with all this information, how to do stuff on that car and things about the car itself. So that's an object. PowerShell passes off those objects so that you can do cool things with them, like sort them, group them, put them in as input of another command, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what pipeline is. It's taking the results of one command and putting it into a second command.
Bingo, right there. Yeah, before we get started, if you have any questions, we can just jump right into it.
Dear Chris and Jordan, can you use PowerShell to edit the local group policy editor to change the desktop wallpaper for all users? For example, when any domain user logs onto Workstation in a lab of 32 computers, the wallpaper will display a picture of a palm tree sitting on the beach. Timothy D.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
This is one of those where PowerShell can do almost anything, but group policy is already built in where you can change that. So while I love PowerShell, just using what's built in with group policy would probably be the easiest option.
That's exactly it. You can do this, but don't. You rather than actually directly modify this, unless you have to because you're not in a domain, which you can. The command that you're looking for is set item property. And in this case, the path will be the location of the path you want to modify, which is on the user's hive. So be careful. If the user's not logged in, their user hive's not loaded. That's really what it comes down to. That's why group policy is better. Use it, please. If you have any questions or don't have a domain and have weird little workarounds, hit up our support. Find me. I'll show you how to do it. But it's set item property, and the location, at least for this in the current user, is this HK current user control panel desktop. There's also one in Microsoft Windows current version something to make one that you cannot override. If you set it here, it can be overridden by the user, but whatever, I digress. That's
so much for losing data.
Group policy. Anyway, group policy is really the answer. So anyway, so kind of moving on a little bit. So going back to the PowerShell, hey, this is a process. Ooh, there's my update window. It's still kind of doing stuff. So we're going to go back over to here. With this, so let's say, for example, you want to know about your processes that are running. We can use the command, there's one to kind of find out what's running on your computer. It's the command get process. Mm-hmm. If I just hit enter with no other information, it shows all the processes here that are running on my machine. You could actually compare that with the task manager, and that is a big task manager. And you can actually see that detail here and actually compare and find out, oh, it is actually accurate because it's pulling from the same source. So, surprise.
All right, so this is where we want to go over get member, because where we're talking about methods and everything, if you have the command get process, you can pipe that into get member and it will let you know everything you need to know about the object you pulled back.
Absolutely. So get member, what he's talking about is, so if I'm hitting the up arrow on my keyboard to do the last command here, I'm going to pipe that over and say, take the results of this command, and we're going to say, get member on that. Tell me all the members of this. And we're going to see some interesting options and interesting data here. First off, we're going to find out that the type is a system.diagnostics.process. That's a process object, which means by nature of being a process object, all these methods, all these properties are available for us to see. So in this case, we could look down and see, oh, there's a method to close this process or to kill this process. There's a property about the handle of this process, or what else do we want to know about this? Anything really. Probably all that we want to know about it and more. So we can actually select all. Let's do select all. Let's get one process. So you can actually specify a process name. So Notepad. I don't have Notepad open. Let's do PDQ inventory. PDQ, I can spell.
Inventory console.
Inventory console. That's not it.
Was I wrong?
Strike one.
PDQ, am I spelling PQD? Oh my goodness. You know what? PDQI star, because you can use wildcards and not typo. That's why. Look at that. PDQ inventory console and PDQ inventory service. Thanks, wildcards. So, if I wanted to see all of those, I can do select object star, again, a wildcard to say select all available properties, and see all the information about those.
Since we had two object return, it's actually going to give you both sets of data, so it's going to be a long return here.
Yep, it's hard to notice, but you'll see this little line here that has no data. That's separating the two. So, in fact, if I even go back to the get process with just everything here, let's say I wanted to sort this. Because it's an object, I can sort it on any one of these available properties. So let's say I want to sort it by ID for some weird reason. Sort ID. Oh my goodness, it's sorting by ID. Well, what if I want it sorting by ID descending? Well, I can do that too. Magic. Actually, it's just because it's object-based scripting. So we can take all the different properties there for that. So
in this case, guys, I mean, it's great you can do that. Can you give an example of where you would use this type of thing?
Oh, absolutely. So say for example that you actually have a process or a list of processes that you need to go through and stop, or maybe some services that you need to go through and stop in a very specific order. You can sort them by order of like when they've been started by the process ID and then stop them. So if I wanted to say, you know what, let's get that process, and I'm going to open up Notepad here just because I don't want to close anything that I have open. If I have Notepad open, or any process that you need closed, I can basically say get process, Notepad, we get that. I take that resulting object, and pipe it over to stop process. Pretty easy? Yeah? Enter. Notepad closed. Just that easy.
And I guess to kind of understand what it's exactly sending over, if we did the get help for stop process.
Get help, stop, process. All the stuff.
Scroll in and tell you what syntax it took, basically what kind of information it'll take in what order.
Let's do the full one here. So if we do get help stop process dash full, we get all the information you ever wanted to know and more. And you can find out specifically what's actually being accepted as a parameter, which in this case, what you're talking about.
Yeah, so we see ID, which is an integer, and it's a position of 0, which means that's what it looks for first. And that is a property name, or the other one it's looking for an input object, which is looking for a process object, which is what we grabbed.
Yeah, so if you're ever looking at the help, look for the position for these parameters. That's going to give you an indication on what is accepted based off position without specifying the name. So for example here, when we had Notepad open, excuse me, let me start Notepad real quick. We'll do run Notepad. Here, if I do stop process, if I just say Notepad, that's the position 0 because I haven't specified that I actually want to stop the name Notepad or the ID of whatever the process ID is. And so what Jordan is actually talking about is when you do get process Notepad, the resulting object that we saw when we ran get member, we'll show this again, is that the object return is a process object. So if we scroll back up to the help and see that the stop process accepts a process object, a process array actually, that's what those little square brackets after that mean, process array. That basically says when I pipe that to the stop process, so I pass over the process object, the stop process can say, oh, you're a process object, I know what that means, and I can stop you. So that's kind of what's going on there.
And for the ones that said for the position was named, that means that it doesn't look for it by default, but if you tell it to look for that attribute, it will find it still.
Yeah. So, like, coming back to another example, Lex kind of was asking about, going back to the IP config command, if you need to find an IP address or you need to use that IP address, you can do some fancy footwork here to get the IP address with here in the ipconfig by doing some things like /f, blah, 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 and do some stuff to get that. In PowerShell, you can, seriously, it's as simple as doing, what is it? If I don't know about any commands with IP, how do I find that out?
Get-command,
oh my
and
goodness.
then probably asterisk, and then we'll say get asterisk and then IP.
Get IP asterisk. So anything that has get and IP. Find out. There they are. There's a lot. I'm not going to bore you with the details because there's a lot of commandlets here, but it's get net IP address, I believe.
Yep.
This guy right there. So get net IP address. And we can actually get those that information right there. We can see that the IP address is actually available. There's multiple adapters, so there's multiple IP addresses. But I can select just those properties, right?
Yep. Just pipe select IP address.
IP address. And there they are. There's multiple. There, you can see there's IPv6 as well. You can also do this by surrounding your command, the get net IP address, in parentheses and do dot IP address to actually use the property, getting it from the dot there. So it works the same way.
Yeah, the only thing that's really missed when you do that one is it doesn't have a header because it's just returned a different way.
Yes. In fact, that's the same as doing this get net IP address piping to select, or select is actually short for select object. I should actually type this out. And then that's actually the same as expand property for IP address. So it's the same. It's doing that, just kind of taking that guesswork out for you when you're building your automation, your scripts, and to do stuff. You don't always need that property name there, the header, so we can just act on the data here, right? So, do we have any questions before we move on?
Dear Chris and Jordan, how do you keep track of your PowerShell scripts and their versions? Sincerely, Jordan M.
Hi, Jordan.
Hello. This is something that's actually always pretty bad at. I would basically name it 1_ and then a version name and just add it to the automation server that I had, but I didn't really keep track of the old ones.
Poor man's versioning. So there's a lot of different options out there. I've kind of gone back and forth a little bit depending upon my environment. In fact, right now I'm just reliant upon our file server backups because I don't really keep anything too, I don't know, anything that I can't really quickly build again. So, but I know that I believe Colby here in house uses GitLab. If he's there in the chat, he'll probably pipe up here. But Git is very popular. So if you use GitHub or use GitLab or maybe Bitbucket, they're all based on Git. Those are good. GitHub, the free versions don't allow private repositories, so if that matters to you, look at GitLab or Bitbucket, which they do. I think GitLab, you can actually even do your own local with their community edition, so there's a lot of options out there. There's Subversion if you want to go download and configure that, but Git is probably the most recommended. That's one I'm most familiar with. I like Git, so check it out. Good question. So moving on, I guess now that we kind of got that little background there, a little bit about the pipeline is, what can I do with the objects with that pipeline, right? So another common thing that we use PowerShell for is to list files and directories, right? If you're familiar with command line, you're familiar with command dir, which lists the directory contents, which PowerShell does the same thing because it's an alias for, I'm going to go to a different level here so there's less data. Dir, it's an alias for get child item. It's the exact same thing. Common use case is you want to know files that are larger than or less than a certain size, or you want to know files that have been written to a month ago, 2 months ago, 12 years ago, whatever. You can do that with getChildItem by piping it to another commandlet called whereObject. So let's do that, right? So let's say we want to do getChildItem where, let's say, what do we want to do? WhereObject.
Length.
Let's do length. So if you want to know more about that property, in fact, before we do this, let's actually pipe that to getMember to find out more information. Because you should always use getMember.
All right. With this one, we're actually going to get two results because we have two different object types. One's a directory and one's a file type.
Yep. In fact, you can see that here. One is a file info type, and one is a directory info topic. So or excuse me, object. So in this case, if we do get child item, let's say we want to go through our users directory recursively, which we can do that, and we want to find all the file sizes that are larger than, I don't know, 2 megabytes, because why not?
All right.
So we're going to do where, if I could spell, object. We're going to put them in these curly braces to say, hey, do this in here, do this code. We're going to say, we're going to use what's known as a represent, what's
Placeholder.
Placeholder, thank you, that's the word I'm struggling for. Placeholder for the current object in the pipeline, which is either $_, which is the most common, or $PS item. I'm going to use $_ because it goes back to older versions of PowerShell as well. So we'll do $_.length, because if you look at the file object, or excuse me, the file info object, one of the properties is length, which is the size of the file. Here we're going to say where it is greater than, and if you need to know operators, again, you can do control space. Look at all those. Oh my gosh, there's greater than, so I'm going to use that one. And then how do I do 2 megabytes?
I think 2/MB or just 2 MB.
2 MB. 2 MB. That's how cool it is. So this is going to tell me all the files that are larger than 2 megabytes in the C users directory recursively. And go.
Hey, Chris, is that case sensitive?
No, it is not. It's a good question, actually. Case sensitivity you can enforce. By default, it is not case sensitive. So if I wanted to make it case sensitive when I'm doing a comparison, you can. So if I want to say we're length greater than 2 megabytes and what else do I want to do? Name, there's a like, excuse me, why am I doing dash name? I'm doing this underscore name, like, there's like, and there's also C like, and all the different C ones, CEQ, CGE. So these are the case sensitive equals or greater than and equal to or greater than, all those. So you can't actually do those with operators. If you do, just be careful.
Yep. And with the results, it actually kind of points out one of the most valuable things with the pipeline is it handles one object at a time. So if your initial command pulls several objects, it's not going to go through and try to run it against all at once.
That's a good one. In fact, so when you're filtering data, in fact, I'm hitting the up arrow key to run that same command. If I was doing where objects are greater than 2 megabytes, I want to find these objects, but then I want to talk about them or act on them. I can pipe again to take the results of that filter, pipe it on. There's another command called for each object, which basically says, for each one of these guys, I want you to do something with them, for each one of those objects. So in this case, maybe I want to do something silly like write output, here is my file. And then in there I'm going to put name. Let's do that in this cool fancy syntax. That name. For each one of those, here's my file, and then here's my file, because it does that for each one of those objects that are in the pipeline.
So you did something that might be new to people. You put a $sign and quotes around the placeholder.
Yep.
Why would you do that?
So when you're actually doing double quotes, we actually just spoke about this morning with another employee here. In PowerShell, single quotes mean literal strings, double quotes mean strings, but you can also do sub-expressions. So kind of a side bonus for those of you kind of moving on here. In quotes, if I'm doing here is my date, there's a command for getting date called getDate. If I just do getDate, this will return exactly that, but if I actually put in parentheses with that $sign, it basically says this is a sub-expression, get my date. And it'll actually do that. So you can, exactly what Jordan's talking about was right here. So, good call. I'd habit, right? So
let's talk about the difference between the underscore and the PS item. We actually have a question.
Oh, do we have a question on that? Sweet. Let's bring it up.
Dear Chris and Jordan, nerd versus blah blah. Are they synonymous? I see scripts in the wild using one or the other. Which is the standard, and does it matter? Sincerely, Stephen V.
Hey, Stephen.
Hi, Stephen 5.
So they are the same thing. It's just the $_ was what it was original, and they changed it to PS item in later versions. So $_ will work on all versions of PowerShell. PS item will work on 3 or later, but it is the same placeholder.
Exact same. 100% the same. They are synonymous. In fact, they mean the exact same thing, the current object in the pipeline. So if you have all version PowerShell 3 or later, you can use PS item with no repercussions. However, if you try running that against a machine that has PowerShell 1 or 2, it will not understand that and it'll blow up. So just be aware. But other than that, they work exactly the same. So good question. That is a common one that we see. In fact, you can actually mix them up if you wanted to. So going back to our other example here, where object length greater than 2 megabytes, and let's do .name.
You put
I see, even without doing it, just habit. PS item dot name, like, what do we got? We had an Adobe, or anything that starts with A asterisk. Those ones right there. So you can actually mix and interchange them. I don't know why you would. That makes it really confusing. Don't do that. But this is just to show that they mean the exact same thing. So use them. This is how you manipulate items that are currently in the pipeline to do filters. Another common one that we use is get volume. I know that's one that I personally like.
Yeah, if you're not paying for any monitoring software, knowing which hard drives are filling up is kind of handy.
Yep. Bam. Let's see what that does.
So Jordan and Chris, I mean, you put this in the pipeline. Do you have to flush the pipe? I hate saying it like that, but how long is that resident in the pipeline, just for that command, or does it retain it?
Just for that command. In fact, that's actually a really, really good question that has deep implications. So for those of you familiar with other different scripting languages, you might be familiar with things such as standard out, standard error, or different information like streams for logging. PowerShell commands like this one, the pipeline, will go until there's no more redirection. So until a command actually digests and eats up that, for this case, the standard out, the output stream, it'll keep on going in the pipeline until there's something that says, okay, I know what to do with this, or it outputs to the console.
So the pipeline is just performing a second command on the results of the first one. So if your object was in a stored variable, then the data is still there with that variable, and you could run the same pipe over and over, but each time you run the pipe, it's just running it the one time.
Yep. And there's a couple different random gotchas that people run into with just that very problem, especially when you're trying to write output to the console. There's a command called write output to write to the output stream or standard out. Here I am, and there it is. A lot of other people often do write-host because they can do fancy things like colors and do the same, what seems like the same thing. However, the difference is write-host does not write to the output stream. It does not write to standard out, so you cannot redirect this to another command. It doesn't work. It blows up. It doesn't do what you expect it's going to do. So that's actually a common use case that I see with people with that redirection is that command stops with write-host, whereas write-output, I can actually pipe on to other things and move on and continue.
I think Jeremy Snover is pretty adamant that write-host is almost always wrong.
Yes. Short of like minor testing things that you're doing, the creator of PowerShell, Jeremy Snover, the shell father, he recommends using write output usually. That doesn't mean there's not a use case for write host, but just usually is kind of what he's saying. So be aware of that because that redirection for the pipeline is really what's important with that. That's a really good question, actually. So coming back to the get volume here, with this information, you can then start filtering actual valid information that you want to know. Because if we run this command, which we did, we see that there's a D drive, a C drive, and a system reserved space that you might be familiar with if you've installed Windows before.
So if we're doing get volume to check how full the drive is, we want to remove both the system reserved and the CD-ROM.
Okay.
So you'd want to pipe that into in where object.
Where object, good, awesome.
And then $_ or PS item.
Okay.
And then it's drive type.
Drive type. How do you know it's drive type?
Would you please look at the command? I want to kind of highlight there. Up top, when we ran the initial command, it lets us know what attribute we're looking at.
Bingo.
All right, and we can either do equals fixed or does not equal CD-ROM.
Okay, let's do in this case, we'll do, if I could type, it's not in the same window, let's do equals fixed. So if I hit enter, we should only see the C and the system reserved. Mm-hmm. Success.
All right, and then if we want to get it down to just the C drive,
okay.
We'd want to do and the drive letter, or $_
drive letter
does not equal $null, which is just the placeholder for nothing.
Yeah, null is kind of an interesting topic in and of itself. It just means nothing. It has not been initialized. It's not an empty string. It's not something blank. It's has not been set. So in this case, the drive letter has not been set for one of those, and so we do drive letter does not equal that.
So what you're saying is nothing is nothing, but null is something? Or is it nothing is something and null is nothing?
That. Right there. So follow that chain of logic, and when you do, welcome back.
It's almost in a super state.
Yeah. Let's get a discussion of like quarks and stuff. So here we actually get the result C, which is exactly what we want, and we can get all that information. And so what can we do with this?
So if we're going back to trying to figure out how full it is, you basically want to divide size remaining by the initial size and multiply it by 100.
Excellent. In fact, we actually got this out as bonus content just for you guys, so I'm actually going to pull that up over here, not over there, over here. One of these guys right here. So I have a difficult time sometimes naming my variables. So I care about this much is how much space I care about for the drives. So in any case, you can see that that first command that we ran is here.
On the bright side about a variable that long, after it's created, once you start typing the variable out, you can just tab and it will fill out the rest of the text for you, so it goes quicker after the initial.
Yep, so basically what we're saying is get the volume, get the same stuff we were looking for just a moment ago, and then for each one of those, we're going to divide the size remaining by the size and multiply by 100 to get a cool little percentage, and then we're going to give a little warning. So I'm going to run this. Okay, good. I have no drives that are less than 20%. What about less than 90%?
I love that error.
Warning, danger. C drive is below 90% disk space available.
We only have
alarm.
90% left.
So
This is when you want to start panicking.
we've used already 10% of our drives.
Start deleting the System 32 folder.
That's right. Delete everything. RMRF. Woo. So at this point, you could actually take this and put this into a tool. You could put this into our scripts to run, into a PDQ deploy package to deploy against targets. So we can actually copy all this here, go over to inventory, in tools, and hey, look, I've actually already created it for you. So
Yeah, and if your computer does have multiple drives, it will just run it against both drives and give you the result for both.
yeah. So in this case, I wrapped this command that we ran in an invoke commandlet, which basically says run this on the remote machine. Now, this is kind of an advanced one. I just want to show you how you could do this, because getting PowerShell remoting enabled is a prerequisite for running this command. PowerShell remoting, quick little, easy to set up. On each target machine, all you have to do, I'm going to clear the screen here, you just need to type enable ps remoting force. That's it. In fact, you can copy that command. I'm going over to inventory and say I wanted to run this on any one of my machines. Let's say D10 sublab. I can go to tools, remote command, PowerShell, and run that command, and it will enable PowerShell remoting so that I can then do remote PowerShell. The difference between tools running remote command versus tools running that command versus this remote command is this remote command works similar to PDQ deploy in that it copies over to that target machine and runs this command locally, whereas the tool runs the tool locally on your console machine. So just something to be aware of.
If you've already have it enabled and you're in the command, it's not going to break anything. It will actually just report back that PS remoting is already enabled.
Yeah, let's run. We can run that here. Watch, this sublab's going to be one of the machines that are broken or something, and it's going to blow up, and we're just going to eat our words here. So it's intense here. While we're waiting, do we have any other questions or something we can answer? Maybe?
Not really a short one, though.
Oh, well.
Let's take a look.
Well, we can do it.
Dear Chris and Jordan, can we have PowerShell script that checks if a computer requires a reboot pending reboot state, and if yes, then restarts the computer? This will be a useful script to deploy without need to perform a PDQ inventory scan computer prior to reboot. Sincerely, Dakir B.
Hi, and thanks for the question. Yes, you can. You just need to identify all the spots you need to do that. I'm not going to write that script here live, but I will show you a quick way to do that. Here, I'm just going to define a variable, what's called a hash table, which is just a little object that has some properties I can define. So if I have one location I want to find, like I think there's the CBS, the component-based servicing model section, I'll have it default to false. I'll have the Windows update one set to false. I'll have the files pending change or whatever it is, false. When I create this, I run this script, I now have this object called should I reboot that has those three properties as false. I can then go through and say if condition here, I'm just going to say true, if I could spell. Then I can actually go query those. Like in the case of the CBS, it's in the registry. So get item, property, path, H key, local machine, blah, blah, blah. I don't know it off the top of my head. Value, search for the name of the value, which is like reboot, pending, or reboot, whatever. Get that value, stick that in the if statement here. So if it finds a value, that makes it that this statement is true, and then you say, should I reboot dot, in this case, let's say it's the CBS one, CBS equals true. Then you do this for each property, so you have 3 if statements here. If any one of those are true, then you tell it to reboot. So that's how I would do it. So, good question. Yeah, so that's kind of quick way to filter intro to pipeline. It's not a deep dive, but hopefully it's enough to get you started and get the brain juices flowing, get some questions, take our survey, give us some ideas to help you.
Yeah, if you're stuck on anything, Git member will help you find out more about the object of returning your command, and it will help you move forward with everything.
Yeah, so thanks for watching. I'm Chris.
I'm Jordan.
Boy.
Thanks for joining our webcast today. Congratulations, Stephen V., winner of our PowerShell t-shirt. Send us your info at webcast@pdq.com. And don't forget, our next PowerShell webcast will be scheduled for August 15th. Hope to see you there, and thanks again for joining us today.